Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about those CFP rankings that came out yesterday. I have some issues, no doubt about that. I don't love that Boise State would get a bye in that scenario. I don't love the way that they're breaking down all of the different 2-loss and 1-loss teams. Feels like they're just looking at the record, ordering those teams, and then deciding who they think is the better team between that group. But we'll see what happens. Obviously, this weekend will be huge, and those next rankings will really give us an idea of where their minds are at going forward. But let's get into this big-time game. I cannot wait for this one because it's not one that we expected by any means. It's not one that everyone circled on their calendar and said that one's going to be for a spot in the playoff, but it might just be for a spot in the playoff. Obviously, both these teams would have jobs to do after this game. You know, Notre Dame would have to go beat USC. Army would have to go on and win the American, obviously. But it obviously would put them in a great spot. There's no two ways about that. Notre Dame, to me, is probably still working off the stink of that NIU game. Seems like they're not for the CFP committee by any means, but they are to me, no doubt about that. And it'll be interesting to watch what they can do in this game. They've done a really great job, no doubt about that. They've handled business. They've done their what they've needed to do. A little bit of a tough spot against Louisville, so something to watch there. Maybe Army can. They probably can't be as explosive as Louisville is, but they absolutely can do some of the things defensively that Louisville can do. But a huge reason for why Notre Dame is kind of finding this groove, why they're kind of going off to the area that they probably need to be to compete in the playoff is Riley Leonard and Mike Denbrock. That was a marriage that early on looked a little bit shaky. It didn't necessarily look the way that Notre Dame fans wanted it to look, the way that a lot of them expected it to look. They have kind of made that work. It's kind of found the mold that a lot of things, you know what it kind of reminds me of is Tommy Rees and Jalen Milroe last year. It was a little bit ugly to start. They were trying to figure out what he does best, where he fits into the offense, how do they want to expose this, or how do they want to make this offense explosive. And it feels like they found it over the last 4 or 5 weeks. It feels like they found what Riley Leonard does well. It feels like they found what these wide receivers do well, and they're attacking that over and over and over again. Now, I still have my worries about them against an elite defense like a Georgia or an Alabama or someone like that. But I still do think they found a little bit of rhythm on offense that they just didn't have early on, and it gives them a huge leg up in a number of different games, including this one. But over on the Army side, I think you have a ton on this plate, and I think when you look at this Army team, you have a moment here to totally change what your football program is about. You have a chance to beat Notre Dame. You have a chance to get a huge win, and you get to do it, obviously not at home, obviously, but you get a home game, quote unquote, to do it. It is going to be incredible to watch this unfold, and if they were to get this win, the entire narrative around what Army football is and what it can be would change overnight. I'm just being totally honest. It would be one of those moments that they could point back to in 25 years and say that is the moment that Army football changed. Now, obviously, they wouldn't quite get to the CFP. They would have a very clear path where they would just have to beat Tulane in the AAC championship. They're already in it, so they wouldn't necessarily have to win the UTSA game. They would have to win that Tulane game. But regardless, it would put them in a position where everyone's looking at them in the group of 5. Everyone's saying that is the team that everyone should be watching. That is a team that can compete with some of the elite teams in the country. That is the team that really can push a lot of these elite teams. So it's going to be awesome to watch. There's no doubt about it. I mean, this Army program has been in the dark for a very, very long time. I can't remember a time where Army football was a big factor in college football. They are going to be Saturday, and that's a special thing. Cannot wait to see that unfold. And as you can imagine, this one's going to be decided on the ground. Both these teams are top 11 in the country when it comes to rush yards per game. Jeremiah Love and all of the running backs that they have for Notre Dame, along with Riley Leonard, is an elite group, no doubt about that. And then for Army, Bryson Daly and Kanye Udo, one of the best duos in the country. A really, really elite group. And Bryson Daly, frankly, should get a little bit more love for the Heisman, but getting injured a little bit hurt that. But incredible player, and definitely a guy that, if you're going to win one of these games, it usually takes a Herculean performance. He has that in him. There's no doubt about that. He has a lot of juice in him, and I think Army's in one of those spots where they've been dominating pretty much all year. They've been rolling through teams. They've looked incredible. Obviously, that North Texas game was a little bit scary at moments, but they handled business there, got on with their day. They're coming off a bye. This is a totally different world. This is an entirely different human that's on the other side of the field. This is a 300-pound Riley Mills, a 300-pound Howard Cross. This is not a normal team by any means. So it's going to take some gimmicks. There's no doubt about that. It's going to take that triple option offense, putting him off kilter and putting him and confusing positions and maybe hitting a couple of big plays, which we'll get into here in a second. Also, they're going to need turnovers. There's no doubt about that. Army, as well as Notre Dame, have actually been really good around turnover margin per game, both over 1 per game. So really winning the turnover battle. Who can keep that going? Who is going to go on the other side of that? And probably will decide it one way or the other. Obviously, Notre Dame has a little bit more wiggle room in that respect, but one of those things that Army's probably really got to win that turnover battle if they want to get that win. But when you look at this game, I think a lot of people will say, well, Notre Dame rolled over Navy. So obviously, they're going to be able to handle the Army attack. They're going to be able to handle what Army has to throw at them. I wouldn't make that one-to-one comparison, if I'm being totally honest. First, Navy just gave the ball away a lot. They made a lot of just unforced errors because frankly, it looked like they were scared of the guys that were on the other side, which can't necessarily blame them too much. But at the end of the day, Army is much less likely to make those mistakes. They're much better about holding onto the ball than Navy is. Also, they have a more dynamic pass game, so they attack you just a little bit differently as well. I'm not saying that Notre Dame being able to dominate Navy isn't a good indicator of this game, but I wouldn't necessarily say they dominated Navy, so they're going to dominate Army. But the Notre Dame defense, in a lot of ways, is one of the best run defenses in the country, giving up about 126 per game. It probably will get over that. Let's be totally honest. Against Army, it usually does get over that. Can Army get to 200 is really the question that I have. Can they get to 200 yards rushing? Can they really get this thing rolling downhill? And then on the other side, they're the number one rush offense in the country. They're also the number one rush defense in the country. They allow 71 yards per game. Obviously, not the elite talent necessarily that they're playing on the other side, but definitely a good moniker for how good this team is and what they can do. So this one's going to be special. There's no doubt about that. You got two historic programs, Army looking to make history, Notre Dame looking to get back where they feel like they belong. It's just something that the 12-team playoff gives us that the 4-team just didn't quite give us. I still think this would be a relatively big game in the 4-team, not quite as big as it is in the 12-team. But players to watch. Bo Collins is a huge player in this game, and I think he's a huge reason why this offense has really taken off. They did a great job early on in the season kind of getting him going, but over the last couple of weeks, he's really been the guy. He's been absolutely huge, and I think he's one of those guys that when you talk about physicality and the advantage that Notre Dame's going to have, it always starts in the trenches, but it's going to extend to the outsides, and that's going to be one of the big-time examples of that. And then Riley Mills on the interior. That guy next to him, actually, Howard Cross, might be out for this game. He's still very much up in the air. He was out for that Virginia game. We'll see what happens with that. But Riley Mills, regardless, is going to have to step up big and really dominate the interior. They slow down that dive from Kanye Udo. It's going to be a really long day for this Army team. Then you got Noah Short on the other side. This is a very, very important player for Army. He is kind of one of those wing backs, one of those kind of dynamic players. He is a big-time receiver for them as well, and they got to hit some big plays. He's going to be huge coming off the edge and really getting this Notre Dame defense spread out, but also hitting that one or two big plays down the field in the pass game. And then you got Brett Gurina, a very, very talented linebacker for Army. They got to fly around. Pretty much all of these linebackers. They're going to be rotated in a lot. They're going to play around with a lot of things, but they got to fly around. They got to make every type of play. They cannot miss tackles because if they do, this one's going to get ugly in a hurry. I'll just be totally honest. So he's going to be hugely important along with all the other linebackers on Army's roster. Keys to the game for Notre Dame. Trust your run game. I see no reason to believe why your O-line should not own this day. Now, obviously, Army's going to give you a little bit tougher of a challenge than a Navy did, but at the end of the day, you're the 11th best rush offense in the country, 216 yards per game. Lean on your group. Lean on that running back in Jeremiah Smith and Jadarian Price, and just trust that group. I don't see any reason why they shouldn't, and if they do start to force the ball downfield, then some issues could arise for this offense where they get a little bit stagnant. Also, just don't beat yourself. Army's going to need turnovers. They're going to need penalties for them to win this game. Now, they are relatively good at limiting turnovers. They did have 2 last week, although very weird game last week, so I think one of those not quite as big of a deal as it seems. And then on the other side of that, they're not great at limiting penalties. 6.2 per game in the penalty category. Got to make sure that that does not happen on Saturday because That's really the only way Army's going to have a shot, is if you give them shots to win this game. And then eliminate big plays. Notre Dame is really good on the back end, no doubt about that. But if they don't allow a big pass play in this game, they will win. They cannot allow that big time play that gets Army really moving, that gets this Army offense into it and adds a little bit of doubt for Notre Dame. So eliminating that big time play that gets Army really back into this and really ignites them is the big time goal here. And if they can do that, then I don't see a world where Army's able to win this game. For Army, run the clock. Really run the clock. Do it every single time you have the ball. And honestly, that's kind of just the way an Army game goes, to be more than honest. But limiting possessions, running the ball, chewing clock, all the most important things for Army if they're going to be able to get this one. And just winning the time of possession might not be enough. They might need to win it by 15 minutes, by 12 minutes, and really dominate that clock, because the reality is you have certain players on the other side that your defense just is not going to be able to tackle for 4 quarters. You have to give them time off. You have to give them time to reset, or Notre Dame's going to score 50 points in a hurry. And then you do got to get a big play early. We talked about Notre Dame having to limit that. If Army can get that early in the game, let's say they go up on a big play on the first drive by 7 points and it's 7-0, and Notre Dame looks up and maybe they start to panic a little bit. I think they have all the confidence in the world going into this game, but it can creep in very, very quickly, especially with a team like Army that you know is going to be tough to defend. If they hit that one big play, if they get one big play down the field and it's 7-0 before Notre Dame knows what hits them, I think this thing could get interesting in a hurry, and this Notre Dame team could get a little bit clammed up in a hurry. And then keep your eyes on number 4. This kid's a monster. Jeremiah Love is one of my favorite players in the country. He can take over this game, point blank period. He can do just about everything you want him to do on the field, and he will be the best football player on the field on Saturday. Army's got to know where he is at all times. If you lose him, you will lose this game. If you miss a tackle on him, you will lose this game, plain and simple. So cannot wait for this one. This is a really special one, and one that I think Army deserves all the respect for. Cannot wait to watch this one unfold. I do think Notre Dame gets it done. I do think it's going to be a fun game. I really do. I think they're going to battle back and forth for that first half. I think the defenses are going to have a pretty good day early on. I just think it's going to be too much. I think the physicality of Notre Dame, especially on the offensive line, is going to be a little bit too much for Army's defense, and Notre Dame ends up pulling away late. But I do think Army puts up a good fight, and I think they keep themselves firmly in the CFP conversation if they were to go on and win the American title, and Boise State were to lose one, obviously. But I do think they would still be in the fight if this were to happen, but I just cannot pick against Notre Dame in this spot. It's just too big of a physicality advantage on their respect. So if they're going to run the ball, if that's the way this game is going to be decided, I'm going to go with the team with the 300-pounders on their offensive line. So I am going to go Notre Dame here. A huge win for Notre Dame, and they move on to the final test before they get into the CFP, going to USC. We'll talk about that one next week, but I think it's a little bit more interesting than people are giving it respect for. But let's take our second break here, and when we come back, we got some Big 12 showdowns that we got to talk about. Colorado at Kansas, BYU at Arizona could just decide what we see in Arlington in a couple of weeks. So we'll break it down right after this, so stick with us.